Good morning, church. In case you didn't know, right, or you kind of missed it, God is in this place, right? So, and I don't know about you, but the worship team, they really got me prepared to preach, so I hope they got you prepared to receive this word, because God is doing great things in our church. We're in this Behind the Rind series, revealing the fruit. I've been charged to have the fruit of faithfulness, or to speak about the fruit of faithfulness. And I will, we're going to look at the life of Ruth and how faithfulness really brought her to a great place in God. And then we're going to take a look at our personal lives, our individual selves, and how faithfulness can become evident in our lives, and what it means and what that looks like. So let's get started. I want to, I was studying, as I was studying and preparing over the weeks, because unlike, I preach, I'm a Celebrate Recovery pastor, or Celebrate the Journey pastor, and I do Monday nights here and Wednesdays in Norristown. And so, I'm preaching a lot all the time, but, it's rare that I know so far in advance that, I have a particular topic and what I'm going to be speaking on. So I've been studying extra, right? So, but one of the things that happened for me is that I've really been getting challenged. It's really been a challenge to me when we talk about the fruit of the Spirit. So as I was kind of looking at the whole fruit of the Spirit, or the different aspects, because there's one fruit, one Spirit, but it's various aspects of the fruit of the Spirit. And as I was looking, I really came to see love as the foundation for the fruit. Like it's more like the soil. It's the thing that the rest of the fruit kind of grow in. But faithfulness is really like the fertilizer, right? Because once you begin to walk faithful or experience faithfulness in your life, walking with the Lord, you will experience the messiness of this Christian walk. Fertilizer gets smelly and worms and it's messy and there's stuff going on with fertilizer, but it creates what? Healthy fruit or healthy vegetables. It creates a healthier, a more hardy fruit, but you got to contend with the smell, the messiness. But faithfulness, if that becomes an evident fruit in your life, that's where it's taking you. It's taking you to the messiness of this Christian walk. And that's what God called us to. Get your hands dirty. This is not, really smooth, clean, cool. It's nothing like it. But you probably got to be willing, if you're really going to be faithful, to get your hands dirty. So let me give you a little background on Ruth. Ruth was the daughter-in-law of Naomi. Her and Orpah was her co-daughter-in-law, or they married to both of Naomi's sons. And Naomi and her husband Elimelech went to another land, to Moab, because where they were living in Israel, or in the area that they was living, it was kind of like a famine. So they went to another country to, have a little bit, that was a little bit more fruitful, that they could go and have something to eat and, do some different things. Well, while there, Elimelech, he died. So Naomi became a widow. Now, in that day, if the father died, then the sons would step up and take care of the mom. It was just, that's the way they did it. But what happened while they're in that other country, both her sons died. So now you have three widows. You got the mother-in-law's widow, and then you got the two daughter-in-laws that are widowed. And now you got these three widows, and in that day, the way things were, if you didn't really have a husband and you wasn't at home, then you really had nobody to care for you. That was just, while you was at home with your parents, they took care of you. But as a woman, when you went out. When you left home, you got married, because your husband was going to be your provider. And so as a widow, in that day, that meant that you had to, if you didn't have a husband, then you were subject to the care of the community. So if it was a good community, maybe they was, nice and give you some extra bread and extra things, substance to sustain you. But if maybe it was not such a nice community, then, you would really have a lot of hardship. And Naomi knew that her daughter-in-laws, along with her, because if you read through the book of Ruth, you'll see that Naomi actually changed her name. She changed her name to, I think, Myra, and that meant bitterness, like my life is bitter, because my sons died and my husband died, and it's just a bitter existence. And so what she began to do was encourage her two daughter-in-laws to go back home, because they were young, and they could go back to their land in Moab and be remarried, and have someone to take care of them. They ain't have to continue with her and face this hardship. And we'll see as we look at the scriptures that Orpah decided to leave. She was like, I'm not with this hardship stuff, I'm going off back home to my family, and I'm going to find, a new husband and have somebody to take care of me. And so we're at Ruth, first chapter, 15 through 18th verse. And she said, Naomi said, see, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to her gods. Return after your sister-in-law. In other words, go and do what she did. But Ruth said, do not urge me to leave you or return from following you. For where you go, I will go. And where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people. Your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. And there I will be buried. May the Lord do so to me, and more also, if anything but death parts me from you. And when Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more. And see, it was this idea of hardship that placed Ruth in a position to display her faithfulness. In other words, she had the opportunity to leave. And oftentimes, we'll find that in our lives as God begins to develop us and lead us and move us in different directions in ministry and get us involved with different people, that hardship sometimes will present itself. And that becomes a determining factor of whether or not the fruit of faithfulness will be evident in your life. See, the fruit of the Spirit is kind of like, I said this earlier, it's kind of like our identification. It's the thing that makes us stand out. If the fruit of the Spirit is evident in your life, people who are not Christians know that there's something different about you. Earlier yesterday, I went to Walgreens. That's like one of my favorite stores. So I go in Walgreens, and it's a guy, obviously I go there a lot, and so the guy at Walgreens, he knows me, he's like, hey, how you doing, Harold, whatever, hey, man, how you feel? And we talk a little bit. But, he just, we just pass some words. He asked, you want me to check and see if you got any, what they call extra bucks, you get from shopping there. And I say, nah, let it ride. But so yesterday I was there and I was getting some paper because I want to, print out my sermon or whatever. And so he said, hey, man, what are you doing over there, getting school supplies? And I said, no, I'm getting paper. And he said, well, what are you getting paper for? I said, I'm getting paper because I want to print out my sermon for Sunday. He said, I knew it was something different about you. And I said, oh, wow, right? And then he began to tell me he works at the soup kitchen, and he started telling me his story. But then he asked, where's your church or whatever. But my point is that more often than not, if people are watching us and paying attention to us because of the fruit of the Spirit in our lives. We're kind when we don't have to be. We got joy when we should be sad. Right? We're faithful when we should quit and throw in the towel. Right? We continue on with people. And so Ruth, this ideal, and all the way from Genesis to Revelations, right? God recognized faithful people. Faithfulness gets God's attention. If you want to get God's attention, be faithful. You can ask Job, you can ask Abraham, you can ask Moses. You could just go through from the beginning to the end. You could ask Apostle Paul, If you want to get God's attention, be faithful. And Ruth, her faithfulness got God's attention. You know, and it became the very thing that people was like, yo, this woman who is a widow, she's from a foreign land, she's not even one of us. You know, it made me think about, I was talking earlier this morning at 7:30, I was here for the first sermon, but I was thinking about when I first came to this church 14, 15 years ago, I was right there at those doors, right there, and I looked in, and I was like, I don't belong here. I gotta get out of here. And before I could leave, this lady and her husband, who now I know is Marge and Paul Tepper, she grabbed my arm. So now, and I was, people who know me over the years know I was much bigger then. I was a really big guy. And she grabbed my arm, this little lady, and she said, hey, you could come and sit with us. And I was like, and I was stuck, because I was no way I was gonna tell this lady, like, get off of me, I'm leaving this place. So I came and I sat with them in worship and for the sermon, and here we are 14 years later, and I'm still sitting here with them. And so it was because of her faithfulness, and Paul's faithfulness, and other people. You know, I talked about Marquita earlier, how once Pastor Branson, who used to be a pastor here, when he kind of took me under his wing and got me involved with this small group, Connect group. And, you know, the people who know me know, like my Connect group, or the group that I work with, is I got all the roughnecks at the church, right? Like the roughest of the rough. It's the guys that, you know, it can be a little frightening for some people. But I got connected to these guys from Pastor Branson. And when I remember coming the first time I came to that group, he was like, hey man, you know, this looks like something that you could be doing. Now, within the next 3 weeks, me coming back, Pastor Branson said, okay man, you got it, see you later, right? And basically, because he was just saying, you know, like, these guys is too much for me. And so he left me with those guys, and then that turned into connecting with Marquita, and then we started Celebrate the Journey, and that's still going strong, and a lot of people are being blessed, and some of those same roughneck guys are involved with small groups and leading worship and just doing all kinds of things, man, in this church. And it's just because there was some faithful people here that was willing to take the challenge. You know, I was a challenge. I'm not from the suburbs. I'm from the inner city of Philadelphia. I was the homeless kid at like 14 years old. I didn't drop out of high school, I dropped out of middle school, right? So I was a rough little kid on the streets of Philadelphia, and so you can imagine what it was like for me walking in this church. And for the people at this church, like, who's this guy, right? But it was people here that was faithful and willing to, like, grab me by the arm and said, you can come and sit with us. And that's what, you know, Ruth was all about. Like, you know, she was from this foreign land, and she was from this place that didn't really have anything to do with Israel. And here she was saying, like, no, your God is going to be my God, and I'm not going to leave you. The only thing that's going to separate us is death. And this was in the face of hardship. It wasn't like Naomi, you know, she had a bunch of money, and she was like, you know, yeah, you can hang out here or whatever. No, it was going to be hardship. It was going to be a tough time. And she chose to be faithful. And because of that, the whole community that she was in, they heard about Ruth's faithfulness and her devotion to Naomi. Ruth 2:10-12. Then she fell on her face, Ruth, bowing to the ground, and said to him, Boaz, why have I found favor in your eyes, that you should take notice of me, since I am a foreigner? But Boaz answered her, all that you have done for your mother-in-law, Naomi, since the death of your husband has been fully told to me. In other words, the community came back and told, hey, Boaz. And Boaz was, you know, he had it going on in that town. You know, he had a little farm, he had some stuff, and he had servants. So people was like, hey man, this girl Ruth, man, she's not even from here. She's committed to Naomi, and like she's staying and she's doing all this. And at that time, what happened, the experience for Ruth was that she was in the field, because what they would do was when they would pick the wheat or the corn, whatever they was harvesting, like things would drop on the ground. And the widows was allowed to pick up the stuff off the ground and take it home. Now, obviously, who wants this stuff off the ground? But that was the hardship of being a widow. And you would be hopeful that they would drop some stuff so that you could have something to eat, or else you was going to have a hungry night. But anyway, Ruth got this Boaz's attention. And Boaz went on to say, how I was fully told to me how you left your mother and your father and your native land and came to a people that you didn't know before. The Lord repay you for what you have done, and a full reward be given you by the Lord God of Israel, under whose wings you have taken refuge. Now, mind you, and this is what I love about God, like how God used Boaz to bless Ruth, because he ended up being Ruth's kinsman redeemer, right? But God used him, and Boaz was acknowledging, like, look, you ain't gonna really be under my wings, you're gonna be under God's wings. I'm just the vehicle that God is using to cover you, right? And so sometimes, we have to remember that it's God that is at work in our lives, in the lives of the people that we work with. It's easy, to find yourself taking some credit. I mean, like, I've had some very, very miraculous things happen in the lives of some people that I've been working with. I'm saying miraculous. I mean, I've seen people like, strung out on drugs, walk in here, be in the church high on drugs, and become a worship leader, or become a group leader, become totally committed to the work of God. I watched that transformation happen in the lives of men. And I could be like, oh, that's Pastor Harold got skills. No, I don't. Pastor Harold is relying on what? Christ to do a work in me and through me. So the fruit of faithfulness is most evident when life gives us hardships, or when we confront it with hardships, right? Or sometimes, there's a storm. And I said this earlier, that how it could be a hurricane or a flood, right? And I can't swim, right? So I ain't really got any business trying to rescue somebody from a situation like that. But God says, Harold, I want you to go get those people. And I'm like, God, I can't swim. And he says, well, go get the people. And so faithfulness says that I go get the people in disregard of my inability, because what? I'm dependent on God to use me or to be in me and keep me afloat while I go get the people, whoever he's calling us again. And sometimes life is like that. Faithfulness is the fruit of the Spirit that propels us forward in the face of adversity. In other words, this is not a good situation. I said this earlier. I said a lot of things earlier. But I said that, sometimes God puts people in my life, right, that I love, because, I love everybody. But everybody's not lovable, right? And so some people are difficult, right? And so faithfulness says that, I'm going to stand by you and stand with you even though you're wrecking my nerves. I'm telling you, I got guys, man, I love, man. I'm telling you, I love them. And I've seen guys, some of the hardest guys that you can imagine, like break down in tears and say something to me like, thanks, man, for loving me. You know what I mean? And because they knew, they pushed me all the way to the brink of, like, I never want to talk to you again. And I just hung in there, man, because that's what faithfulness is. It propels us forward in the face of adversity, in the face of discomfort. It kind of like compels you to sacrifice. I talked about Marge and Paul earlier in this message, and one of the things that I experienced as far as faithfulness goes is what was with Paul. And a few years ago, I guess about a few years ago, Paul was he got cancer, and he was my mentor. Like, he always prayed for me. Like, he prayed for me. Like, and I was preaching on Monday nights and Wednesdays, and he just always prayed for me. Like I could know, like even if he wasn't there, I knew Paul was somewhere, he's praying for me, before I preached. And so it came really fast, like it just really kind of like, he got diagnosed cancer, and like in a few months, he was gone. But like the week before he passed, I was sitting there with him, I was praying with him. It was on a Monday night, I had to go preach. But I was sitting there, like I came from work, sat with him, because I wanted to spend as much time with him as I could, because it was evident that, he was just really weak. He could barely talk. And I got up to like, all right, Paul, I prayed with you, and I gotta go preach or whatever. And as I began to like leave, I felt him reach out. I mean, he hardly had any strength. But I felt him touch my arm, and I said, hey, Paul, what's wrong? And he said, I want to pray for you before you leave. And I was like, whoa, he's dying. He barely got strength to talk. And he said, I want to be faithful to you to the end. And he prayed for me, and I went and preached, and it shook me, And then I went on, like, the next week he passed, and then a few days after he passed, I got a call from his family, and they asked me to preach, his funeral. To eulogize him. And I said, okay, and I knew it was going to be hard because I was so close to him and he was so intimate in my life. But I preached, and like one of the guys that worked for the funeral home, he wasn't here for the service. He was here because he was working with driving the hearse, whatever he was doing. And he was in the back. And this guy, I preached the sermon, got through it, and this guy he was crying. He was just profusely, I was like, what's wrong with this guy? And just this morning, I'm telling you, this was a few years ago, this morning, that guy was here, and he said, man, I've never stopped coming from the time I heard you preach at that funeral. And I was like, and what I realized in that moment, it was just, like Paul had taught me how to be faithful, and I was just being faithful to do what God was putting in front of me. And that was, believe me, that was that's probably one of the hardest things I ever did in my life, preaching his funeral. But I got through it, and I didn't realize, like I said, this guy said, I've been away, he told me, I've been away from God for years. Something happened, I got bitter, I hate the church, I'm not never coming back. And today, this guy was right there. He stopped me right out there. He was like, hey, man, you remember me? And I was like, kind of. And he said, I'm the guy that was at the funeral, that worked for the funeral company, and I heard you preach. And he said, it just wrecked my life. And he said, I've been walking with the Lord ever since. So my point is that because of faithfulness, we begin to be able to see how God is working things together for our good. Romans 8:28 says, and we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. This word for faithfulness in the New Testament is pitis. The word for faithfulness, and it means really to place your full weight upon something. Like you're sitting in those chairs, and you're confident that those chairs is going to hold you up, and you're not going to go crash into the ground, right? You put your full weight on that chair. Well, this word for faithfulness is like you put your full weight on God, your emotions, your intellect, your abilities, your inabilities, your weakness, everything that you are, you place it on God. And the reason for that is that God desires for us to allow other people to put their weight on us, not for salvation, that's Jesus' work, but for the journey. To come alongside people. So we had to begin to allow ourselves to be built up in a way that we can then allow others to be confident that they can lean on us and they won't hit the ground. Galatians 6:1-2 says, brothers, sisters, if someone is caught in sin, you who live by the Spirit should restore that person gently. But watch yourselves, where you also may be tempted. Carry each other's burdens. In this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ. The scripture says that, we're going to catch our brothers and sisters struggling. And it says, when you do, restore them gently, with love, with patience, with tolerance. Not judgmental. It says gently. Because what? You yourself could be struggling. And because God has now positioned you to have someone else lean on you, be mindful, is basically what the scriptures are saying. Be mindful. We need to develop ourselves in the Word of God to grow in faithfulness. The Word is like where we begin to learn and see the character of God. That's where we begin to understand somewhat what God is doing. I think that God is incomprehensible. Like we don't ever really get to fully understand him, but we begin to see God at work in the world around us and through us. Faithfulness will cost you something. Are you willing to pay the cost? Faithfulness will cost you something. Are you willing to pay the cost? John Wesley says, earn all you can, save all you can, give all you can. Because if we spend all we can, we live in a space where we cannot be faithful. In other words, if we spend everything on me, then I have nothing to give to anyone else. And that's emotionally, that's financially. Mother Teresa says, I don't pray for success, I pray for faithfulness. How about that? Because faithfulness, once again, positions us to be what? Totally reliant on God. As we look at the Rhine, we begin to see the areas of our lives where we're the person who's always needy. I'm always the victim. Nothing ever goes right for me. But to be faithful, God is calling us out of that. He's calling us what? To be dependent on him so he can allow others to be dependent on us. Behind the Rind are the things that we need to develop to allow us to become faithful. It's things that we all got to work on. My wife was at the second service, and afterwards I was standing out there and she came by and she said, sweetheart, there's a couple things you need to fix. I said, yes, dear. And then my daughter was with her, and Rachel said, Dad, Mom, Dad did it great. Like my wife gave me a score. She's like, you got a 9. You got work to do. And then another person, Marquita, she came by and she said, look, you got a 12 from me. And my daughter said, Dad, Mom, people gave Daddy a higher score than you did. Well, my wife said, you need to make sure that you do this. She gave me, And, thank God for my wife, man, because she keeps me straight. We need to take ownership to carry our own burdens so that Jesus can help us or allow us or enable us to carry the burdens of others. We place our faith on Jesus. He's the weight bearer. Then Jesus asks us to bear the weight for others. In the words of Pastor Harold, the only Jesus some people are ever going to see is the Jesus that they see in you. The only Jesus that some people are ever going to see is the Jesus that they see in you. Hebrews 11:6 says, and without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he's a rewarder of those who earnestly seek him. Food for thought. I want to kind of challenge you or leave you with some thoughts today to take home with you and think about. How faithful a person are you to your friends when they request some sort of sacrifice, to your commitments? Do you too often find ways to get out of things? That's one of the things my wife said. She said, because sometimes, I'll commit to something. Like I committed to go pick up my son from Norristown. I got a son that's, he's my son. And I went to pick him up from Norristown so we could come up and do some yard work at our house. But I said, I'm not going to pick them up. I got something else to do or whatever. And I usually, when I say I have something else to do, I usually will say, my wife needs me to do something else. Like that becomes my out. And my wife is always like, you're lying. So, and that's an example of how, we kind of like, we'll say like, oh, I got something else. And then kind of like get out of commitments or things that we said that we would do with someone. What about your commitment to God? How dependable, how reliable are you? Do you hold up when you get involved with things for God? Like when you get involved with things at the church? When things at the church don't go the way that you think they should go? Do you bail out or do you remain faithful? In your relationships, how do you need to become more faithful in these? How do you need to become more trustworthy, determined, constant, devoted? What do you need to change in your life to become a more faithful person? What do you need to change in your life to become a more faithful person? The heart of God is touched by our faithfulness. Like I said, all through Scripture, you'll see that God is always like, have you considered my servant Job? There's none faithful like him, right? Like he's always seeing and recognizing faithfulness. So God is touched by our faithfulness to him and our faithfulness to one another. God is paying attention to you and whether or not you're faithful. So let's get behind the rind and let the fruit of faithfulness be revealed in us. It can be painful. You just think about being an orange or something and getting peeled. I know I got to really dig in, man, And sometimes, I like get at it so, especially if I'm hungry and I'm ripping the fruit up and, because what? It takes something to allow God to what? Peel us. Because it exposes our arrogance, our pride, our unwillingness, our unfaithfulness. And so God he wants to peel us. And we need to allow him to do that. I didn't share this in any other service, but I'm going to share this. It's this story. It's a classic literature. It's a story about this elephant. The elephant is named Horton. And Horton sits on an egg. He gets tricked to sitting on his egg by this bird. And the bird is a lazy bird, so the bird kind of flies away and goes off to Florida and leaves Horton sitting on this egg in the tree. Elephant in the tree sitting on the egg. And, he's sitting there and storms come, hunters come, there's snow. The story, you read the story, it's a great story about faithfulness. If you read the story, it's like icicles just hanging off of him, and elephants don't really do wintertime, but he would not move. And the hunters came to kill him, and they were so amazed that he was sitting up in the tree on his egg that they just kind of like laughed at him. Look, dude, this elephant sitting in a tree. And he didn't run. He's getting ready. They got their guns out. And what he said was, I'll stay on this egg. I won't let it freeze. I mean what I say, and I said what I meant. An elephant is faithful 100%. Are you faithful 100%? Let us pray. Father, I thank you. I thank you for this time. I thank you for your people, and I thank you because you're revealing in us the fruit of the Spirit. I thank you because you're willing to love us even more than we might love ourselves. So as we prepare to give, I pray that you would bless those who have to give and that they would give out of their abundance. But those who might not have to give, I pray that you would bless them in such a way that they would have to give on the next. God, I thank you because you're so good to us. And we desire more than anything else to be faithful to you, that the fruit of the Spirit might be evident in our lives, that others might come to see Christ in us. In Jesus' name, amen.